I remember reading it and like just light bulb after light bulb going off in my head.
This is The Lit Path, a podcast about novels that have changed men's lives. I'm Jack Aldane, and I'd like to welcome you to the very first episode of the series. Joining me at the start is British TV writing and producing legend and author John Yorke. There's no better company in which to begin the journey, so let's begin. The Lit Path's mission is to engage with the modern crisis of masculinity head-on by looking to the transformative power of the novel for wisdom. Wisdom that in the 21st century is still remarkably overlooked by most modern men who, when they have the urge to decode the world, generally consult works of non-fiction. Each episode of the series will feature a guest, and they could be an athlete, an entrepreneur, a public servant, an actor, writer, broadcaster, comedian, you name it, reflecting on and exploring the novel that has resolutely altered their perspective and subsequently made them, if not happier, then more resilient and wiser to some of the more unpleasant truths surrounding the human condition. This series won't always feature a man divulging his adventures in literary fiction, but its goal will remain that of showing how novels, not self-help titles, not productivity guides, not scientific explanations of the world as we know it, can change the depth and texture of a man's inner and outer world. Now, in light of this, I have chosen the Lit Path's first guest with due care and consideration. John Yorke is a TV producer and film script writer and editor who has written several highly acclaimed books on the subject of the art and science of storytelling. Those books include, most notably, Into the Woods and Trip to the Moon, his latest, and one which we spoke about earlier this year on the Booking Club podcast. John, thank you very much for joining me once again for what is the christening of the Lit Path.
It's a pleasure. I'm very flattered to be asked. Thank you.
The torch you will be setting down for us on this first episode of the Lit Path is a novel that our audience will all have heard of. It was published in 1726, 300 years ago this year, and was originally titled Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World, in 4 parts, by Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon, and then a captain of several ships. We know it, of course, today as Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. That is the novel that we're going to be talking about. But first, John, I want to talk a little bit about why you're here with me today.
Sure.
You've spent decades not only producing and bringing to life works of fiction, but also explaining to readers their inner mechanics and the way that they work their magic on us. You know the art of storytelling so well now that I suspect your sense for bullshit is stronger when you read a novel than when you read the Sunday paper. And it's in that sense that I've invited you here to speak as my first guest, because doing fiction and doing it well is for you a serious business, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your relationship to fiction throughout your life, but particularly now that you know it as well as you do, how it has evolved and what fiction means to you now at the age of, if you don't mind asking.
Well, I qualify for a senior bus pass, put it like that. I'm not going any further than that.
We won't be discussing being on a bus just now. We know it's a really hot day in London today, and you've had a hell of a time getting here, so we'll leave that to one side.
We don't want to dwell on the pain, just the pleasure. My relationship to fiction, it took a long time to get going. It began really with comics, and that was the first stories I read for my own pleasure. Yeah, in those days it was TV Comic and Countdown, and then later Tiger and Jag, all the names which I suspect for you and your generation will be almost meaningless. But they were largely stories of Second World War, or they were story of characters on TV. A lot of Jerry Anderson, Thunderbird related characters, and then heroes. Basically, Skid Solo or Roy of the Rovers, and I absolutely adored those, and I sucked them all up. But I looked at what I saw as serious literature, which my sister, who was a few years older than me, was reading, and I rejected it entirely. Now, there was some very psychological reasons for that. She'd got into a private school, and I'd failed all the exams, which didn't help. But so I was envy is too. I didn't really understand what a private school was, but it meant to me that her education was going to be better than mine. And so I resolutely declared that I was not going to be clever and I would do my own thing and just read comics instead. So for years, I never read a book that I knew she'd read, which is fascinating when you think back on it, which is stupid because I missed out on some wonderful books.
Right. How interesting.
Like in 1984, I didn't read until I was in my 40s,
Yeah. I think it's quite common that men of current and past generations came to reading through comics, but you were reading those as a way of engaging with fiction. And then, of course, you did eventually become more of an avid reader of literary fiction.
Well, what got me still, it literally took a long time, and that's why Gulliver's Travels is so key, because what went from there, from comics, was really Alistair MacLean, who was the big thriller writer when I was a child, most of his books were turned into films. Guns of Navarone, Fear is the Key, Where Eagles Dare, probably the most famous. They were huge. And I loved those, and I devoured those. And around the same time, of course, was James Bond. And so, I read all the James Bond books. In fact, James Bond, Dr. No, I think, was the first one where I stayed up all night to finish it. And and once I look back at it now, and there's still lots to recommend those books, I think. But I look back now, and what I took from that, which I think was really important, which I've tried to inject to my own son, is actually, that's what a story can do to you. It can utterly bewitch you. It can make the real world disappear completely. It can make you believe you're somewhere else and give you an incredibly profound experience where real time slips away and you are absolutely transported into another world. And I found that first with James Bond, and then slowly working my way towards literary fiction, which happened by a sort of happy series of accidents. And I didn't want to do it. I had no interest in it at all, but there was a series of books of which Gulliver was key.
A few stepping stones along
the way. There were
stepping
stones on the way. Well, I was a reluctant English student. I was doing English against my will for A level, and I hated. I was reading Othello, which I hated with a passion.
Can you remember why?
Yeah, because I thought partly because we'd been to see the Laurence Olivier film of Othello, which is in blackface. But in that period, that wasn't a thing that anybody got upset about, although it's incredibly uncomfortable now. But what was it? His performance, and I think he is a great actor, is so ridiculously huge and absurd, and it just struck me then. This is just nonsense.
It felt too melodramatic.
Yeah, absurdly melodramatic.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see. I felt, even then, I thought, if you are a great general, why are you falling for this nonsense? Because if you're falling for a handkerchief, then you don't deserve to be a general of a great power, because you are going to get beaten. I brought a degree of logic to it, which I still stand by. But now I think, if you look at Othello now, I think what's so fascinating about it is, I don't think Othello's the protagonist. By every possible definition, Iago is the main character in that story. He's the one who drives the action. He's the one from whose point of view we see it. And so now I look at it as a fascinating piece, but largely because it captures ressentiment, which is, what powers Iago is just resentment, which is the same thing that obviously powers populist politics, jealousy, rage, these liberals staring down at me. I'm going to get my own back. So now I think of Othello as incredibly contemporary, and I would write gushingly about it.
Right.
But that's only because of partly the way we were taught, partly because we were told that Othello was this great noble hero, and I was going, no, you're an idiot.
It's so interesting to me that we've begun this conversation about your relationship to fiction from a young age in relation to heroes and generals and power and rhetoric. Most reading that men do, and the data backs this up, is generally based in truth, some form of history or plausibility. Do you see essentially what I see, John, that male readers broadly tend to reach for non-fiction books? What do you think are some of the reasons for this? Why is it that there needs to be a kind of relationship to reading for men that gives them an anchoring to reality for it to be worthwhile?
Yeah. It's a fascinating question, but what I've looked at of the data seems to back that up. And I know a little bit from my own. I read quite a lot of nonfiction, and my immediate, thing that goes off in my brain. Oh, is that's going to be easier? Faced with two books, the non-fiction book is always easier, and which implies that fiction involves more work. And I think that may be part of it. I think there are a number of reasons. I think fiction, by its very nature, invites you to be vulnerable, because it invites you to open up your heart and let other characters invade your life and then do things to you that you may not always find comfortable.
And that's the harder work, is it, that you're referring to?
Well, it's partly because you have to piece things together. You're not presented with facts. You are doing the work in the sense, I've got to connect that to that, where non-fiction just gives you these facts, isn't it? Obviously. Obviously.
Yeah. It's saying with or without you, this is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And so fundamentally, non-fiction says this is what happened. Fiction doesn't tell you any of that. It makes you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference. Fiction makes you experience and feel it as a participant, by proxy. Whereas non-fiction is the opposite. You are in charge. You're in command. You are the hero, and you're piecing the facts together. Go, okay, I get it now.
Yes.
Now I can talk eloquently at my dinner party about, Whigs and Tories or whatever it.
And as you say, there's a sort of utility to reading, I find, that a lot of men seek, which is that if I'm going to spend time not doing, but absorbing information of any kind, I've got to be able to then go on and use it for it to have meant something to me.
Yeah. The utility, I think, is really important. I mean, I remember when I worked in TV drama, it was always the time, whatever show you were doing, if you wanted male listeners, it had to have utility. There had to be underneath it, even if you're doing a medical drama, is okay. Well, you wanted the audience to be able to work out, what a disease was and how to cure it. It's kind of crazy. And I did a lot of stuff for BBC Two in those days, which was more male skewing, but it was always like, they wanted they wanted factual based drama.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. So could you just delve into that a bit deeper for us and kind of explain sort of how that was justified, was understood, how it was found out that for a male audience, the story you were telling had to give little nuggets of real world information in order to keep them interested?
Yeah, I think it just came out of audience research time. Audience research was fairly primitive in those days, and a lot of producers ignored it. I'm an artist, I make what I want. There's that kind of attitude. And so I think it came out of that, really. But just an observation, the majority of viewers. I mean, I can't talk so much about streaming, but on terrestrial TV, the vast majority of the audience are females over 55.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a BBC One audience. If you want a male audience, you've either got to give them much greater degrees of sex or violence, or you've got to give them utility. And so that became, a really important part of, okay, what is the utility of this program? What can they take away from it? And some of that can be pretty basic, forensic pathology, for example, how you can tell the date of a wound. Maggots is the answer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which is, again, it's a great male fact.
Some of the viewers will find this to have been kind of the most attention-grabbing moment so far, but we are here to talk about fiction. And I would like to know more about your career as a fiction reader. You said that after Ian Fleming and the Bond novels, that was the door that opened your interest into reading more literary fiction. So where to from there?
Okay, well, there was one play in my O-level or A-level English that really got me. And that was Troilus and Cressida. I can't remember why. I think I just found it's the fact that it was bleak and misanthropic but scandalous, and the entire image system is built around venereal disease. I just found as a teenager really fascinating, and wars and lechery, nothing else prevails, and it's a really dark play, but it's kind of brilliant. And the language is so muscular. It's a very male play as well. I mean, Troilus and Cressida are pathetic characters in this, so it takes the conventional tropes and turns them on its head. Everybody is horrible and useless and disgusting and venal. with one or two minor exceptions. And I just found that, this is fun. This is like, I mean, it struck, like a typical, funny enough, I was looking for my A-level essay on Jonathan Swift, or a degree essay on Jonathan Swift.
You still have those?
I've still got them somewhere. And instead I found a degree essay on British colonialism, and which is, and it was really funny because, my worldview then was very kind of, vehemently, brutally left wing, and everything Britain had ever done was disgusting. America was the enemy. Like, we have to embrace other cultures because this is disgusting. And so, like, Troilus and Cressida at that time really struck a chord because it stuck a great big pin into, martial pretensions. So I mean, it kind of appeals to you when you're that age, I think, So I found that, but then the other book I found at the same time studying was Huckleberry Finn, and what I loved in Huckleberry Finn was similar in a way that you want to be Huck, and Huck was against society because society said racism is good, and Huck is going, oh no, it's not. My mate's Jim, he's a slave, like that's wrong. And how he squared that, I found fascinating. But it was the love of language. Mark Twain's language is still the most wonderful thing ever.
I find it really interesting that the next jump from Ian Fleming and the Bond novels and the portrayal of kind of the British hero, that sort of imperialist idea of British exceptionalism, genius, intelligence, supremacy, etc., and immediately went into a very different phase of reading fiction to kind of challenge maybe some of the assumptions that were embedded in previous novels, like Ian Fleming's novels, which let's be honest, are very sort of tub thumping, patriotic.
They're quite adolescent. Those tastes are quite adolescent.
Sure.
We all at that age are rebelling against the things we were brought up with, and we're trying to find out who we are.
Yes.
And so those things just readily appeal.
So when you kind of started to really read fiction yourself as a young man back in what would have been, I'm guessing, the 80s, what sort of novels were coming through into
70s,
the mainstream?
I fear.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Before you got to Swift, were there other forms of novels that really grabbed your imagination? Novels that perhaps were more contemporaneous to your maturity?
I'm trying to think of any contemporary, and not so much. I mean, I read all of Orwell except 1984. I remember doing that, and then from Orwell I went to Graham Greene. And I read all of Graham Greene, which I devoured. I just loved and still do to this day. It's wonderful. The End of the Affair is, got to be one of my top 10 books. So those things. But again, they've all got elements of action adventure. I mean, Orwell's slightly less, to be honest, but Greene certainly, and I found that good. And then I read Evil in War, and of course, which is very funny.
All of the books you've mentioned so far have been books that you as a post-war child might have read because they would have been either published only a few decades before because they kind of captured something of the time. But the book you've chosen to speak about on this episode, as I said at the top, was published 300 years ago.
Yeah.
And yet that was the book that you landed on when you decided to speak about a novel that has stayed with you for the long haul. So let's talk about that book.
If you follow that journey, you start off with a received sense of what literature is like, and you start with your basic, or for me it was just comics, but you receive sense of this is a child's upbringing in London in the 1960s, and then as you become a teenager, you rebel, and because you're trying to find out who you are and what you're looking for, so you test everything. I mean, I was a child of punk rock. So we were always just being obnoxious about anything that our parents represented. But then slowly you emerge from that with a sense of the adults you're going to become. And so for me, what was significant about Swift, and I look back and I think, and I had this reconfirmed when I was rereading it this week, was, oh my God, this is where my entire worldview came from. This is such a brilliant articulation of all the things I still believe. yet at the same time, is responsible for many of the things I still believe. So that's why I remember reading it and like just light bulb after light bulb going off in my head. But it was the thing that, the other books made me read more literature. What Swift did was made me look at, philosophy and history and politics and look at them all through the lens that he does in Gulliver. And so in that sense, it opened up world after world to me. So that's why it's significant. Now, the adult me, for better or worse, some would say worse, starts with this book.
Before we go any further, were your parents big readers?
Yeah, I mean, they were doctors, but they loved books. My dad had a library, which I found enchanting. It was small by modern standards. Although when I was a child, I thought it was things. But he was obsessed with theatre of the absurd, and he was obsessed with art house, we'd call it now. His
Antonin Artaud and
yeah, but also Beckett in particular. Joyce was huge. He was Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. There's a first edition of Finnegan's Wake which I inherited from him, which is a source of great pride.
Yeah,
though I still can't read it. Ulysses I've done, but not Finnegan's Wake.
But it sounds like he wasn't didactic about what you ought to read. He let you read the
comics.
No, he let you read Fleming.
They were just pleased I was reading. I remember my mum read to me, every night as a child. And I remember, what she did. I was halfway through some book. I can't remember what it was now. It wasn't James Bond. It was before that. She was reading it to me, and then it got to somewhere really exciting, and she just did that. She threw it onto my bed, and she said, "Okay, you finish it." And I was furious because I liked my mum reading to me. It was lovely.
Yeah,
But she said, "No, you finish it. I'm done. I'm done. I've done this bit of motherhood."
She did a very clever thing.
Yeah,
there.
she knew I would keep reading.
She left you on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, she did. Doof, doof. I was there, and it was brilliant. And so that was always there. But then Gulliver's Travels, my dad loved Swift as well. So that was always on our bookshelf, along with A Tale of a Tub, Modest Proposal, all of which are incredibly important, the Drapier's Letters. So I'd seen these names and words, but I didn't really appreciate them till I went to university. And then it was only, actually because of what Gulliver did was bring me closer to my dad. We weren't close when we were young. I mean, he was great, but he was quite a distant dad because dads were in those days. They just didn't do parenting, really. But once I'd read these books again, I could talk to him, and his eyes just lit up.
I brought my own copy of Gulliver's Travels, and I read this a good 15 years ago now. It's been a while. It's been even longer for you, I think, since you last read it.
God, well, I mean, again, age-wise, when I was at university, it was like 35 years ago, 40 years ago. But I was just besotted. And, I went on. I mean, the first theatrical thing I ever did, this is hilariously pretentious and studentish, I took A Modest Proposal, which is Swift's tract on, the outrageous treatment of the British to Ireland during the famine, and I took that as a political pamphlet, a satirical political pamphlet, and I turned it into a musical, and I put it on, and so it was I just found this voice that seemed so extraordinary. I've got the script somewhere, and it was very silly, but the underlying point was, and still remains, extraordinary. Which is his worldview, and that worldview, that what bewitched me was the way he bridged incredible intellectual sophistication with just real animal basic coprophilia and just things that just basic toilet humor, and in a way that was, oh my God, you can do that. And even reading it again now, I'm going, oh my, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
This is quite brilliant.
Yeah, fearless.
Utterly fearless.
Fearless, completely anti-authoritarian. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But very funny. Yeah, there's the epitaph on his grave, which I think he must have he obviously wrote himself. Yeah, which is, he says, like, here I lie at rest, where savage indignation can no longer tear at my heart. And those works are works of savage indignation. Brilliantly so. I mean, it's just fantastic.
The thing about Swift, as you alluded to earlier, and we were talking about, the sorts of books that men tend to gravitate towards: history, politics, autobiography. Well, particularly when we look at satire can be a way of engaging with politics by other means. And so if you're interested mostly in reading about politics, say, you might find satire to be the only sort of digestible, palatable fiction that you can engage with, because at least then it gives you a way to think about politics. But you said earlier that Gulliver's Travels opened up a multitude of disciplines to you, a multitude of lenses through which to view the world. I mean, what would you say to somebody who has heard of the novel, as I'm sure most of our viewers have, but has never once touched a copy, opened it up, and is maybe now starting to think, well, I'm interested in all of these things John mentioned, but what would Gulliver's Travels reveal to me about this that I couldn't get from just picking up a book of any of these disciplines?
Okay, well, in really basic terms, it's a really simple idea, which is it's a fantasy expressed in the kind of like in the tropes of the time, which is there's a lot of travel literature, which, as he points out, is largely about going to foreign lands and working out whether they're worth colonizing or not. And he's fiercely anti-colonial. I mean, you really get to that in the third book of Gulliver's Travels. His fury with Britain and the way England hovers over Ireland is really striking even now. But the basic through line is really simple. He just goes to a series of islands, which are really extreme versions of manifestations of English idiocy. I mean, in world idiocy, human idiocy, and tells them in the most ridiculous and human way and possible, with deeply scatological, very carry-on types of humour. So on one level, it's really basic and crude and savage. It's simply the humour you get from being an inch high when the girl looking after you is 40 feet. And that kind of thing. But what I loved about it, what I started to realize, was the underlying moral seriousness of it and philosophical seriousness. What I then realized, as I started to explore it more, was it's about the nature of man, obviously, and it's about the nature of rationality. There's a letter, I remember this from my degree, and I've got it here. He was great friends with Alexander Pope, and they were always arguing about, is man a rational animal? Because of the Age of Reason. Suddenly the Enlightenment, was like, this is extraordinary levels of human progress. And so, the common thinking at that time was, man is rational, and rationality will lead us to greater heights. And Pope brought into more of that than Swift. Swift was incredibly cynical about that. He said, we think we're rational, but we're not. And actually, the more we think we're rational, the more abhorrent we become. And he wrote to Pope, and I've got a letter, I've got materials towards a treatise proving the falsity of that definition, animal rationale, and to show it should only be rationis capax, which is great. And what he means is like, he's only capable of rationality. And that's the whole through line of Gulliver's Travels, is he becomes more and more rational, in inverted commas, as he goes through the four lands he visits. But what we see, and that's the genius of his use of the unreliable narrator, is by the end Gulliver has gone completely mad, and it never sounds more rational, and that's the genius of the book, is the debate that propels, and I think it's linked to something else. There's a very famous quote from Swift. Satire is a glass in which we see everybody but ourselves. I'm paraphrasing madly. Satire is we look in a mirror and we only see the faults of other people. We're fine. And I think one of the ways Gulliver's Travels is structured is to try and find a way to make us see ourselves in that, because he does the most appalling things. I mean, some of it you have to read quite carefully. I mean, some of it is just silly and scabrous. At one point he becomes a human dildo. Like you just go, okay, well that's just okay, and it express it's very funny and awful at the same time. But later, in order to escape from, I think it's probably no, but I think it's probably no. So forgive me, but they to make sails for his boat, they skin children alive to do it. and without blinking.
There was nowhere he wouldn't go to prove his point.
Yeah. But he's making that point that when we think we're rational, we are committing the most barbarous acts.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to the last book, which is in the land of the Houyhnhnms, where the horses rule, and they are creatures of rationality. It's the most extraordinary piece of writing, because apart from the anger that seeps through it, what's so fascinating is the book is about everything he says it's not. He's sitting there saying these creatures are wonderful, but what you're reading is these people are deranged. They're Nazis. It's really striking. It's like looking at Planet of the Apes, the first Planet of the Apes film. Where the Yahoos, the apes.
Yeah.
But this time it's humans. He writes all the time about the pointlessness of satire, but the importance of it as well, to try and get people to realize they are,
to see themselves in the glass. What I'd like to sort of draw attention to is some of the scenes in Gulliver's Travels that stay with you the longest. I remember reading about the king who laces the floor with poison and has people who are out of his favor come to visit him, and in order to approach the king you have to bow down and lick the floor as you get closer. Swift is brilliant, isn't he, at kind of the grotesque, vivid portrayals of some of these most contorted and distorted human rituals and practices.
Well, there's so many. In every sentence, there's a gem. Some of them are more hidden than others, but you go, oh my God.
And the way he writes them too.
Yeah, because, we should talk about that, because that's really important as well. But, the first thing that got me, and I knew the story as a child. I just didn't know that I thought it was a children's book, which is common, and it's fantastic that it got known as that. But the one that got me, as an adult, and again this speaks to my childishness, is when Lilliput is on fire, he puts the fire out by urinating on it. And I laughed for about half an hour because it was just so outrageous and fantastic. And that was, again, that bridge between my childhood world where I would snigger at that kind of thing, but the moral seriousness behind it is what he did so fantastically. And again, it's talking about, that sort of everything I've ever made, in fiction sort of is always tried to aspire. No, not never to that level, but that. But so that's the thing that always strikes me. The image at the end of the book, which is so chilling, where when he comes back after his last travels and he can't talk to his wife and children because they smell of Yahoo. They smell of Yahoo. He can't talk to them, and so the final image in the book, spoiler alert, is he spends 4 hours every day in the stable talking to horses. And he's so clearly gone completely mad. Yeah. And he's so deranged. But it's interesting that a lot of readers didn't get that at the time. And I think some people struggle to quite see, thinking that he's just condemning. It's what makes it so interesting. He's not just condemning humans. Because he's right and Yahoo's are smelly. What he's doing is making you see and assess it yourself, because he's mad. So why are we agreeing with a madman? We have to ask ourselves, is he right?
Yes.
So it keeps throwing it back to us.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly clever. And, there were unreliable narrators before. You see them in Chaucer, but nowhere. The sophistication of the narrative is mind-boggling still.
Gulliver's Travels is a great cautionary tale in the fact that, life will drive you mad. The more you experience, the more you take on, the more likely you are to lose a screw or two along the way. But that isn't necessarily a negative thing. As you say, it challenges the very idea of what it means to be sane and what it means to be mad. Does going madder throughout your life actually make you saner in some way?
There's another famous quote from Swift, which I always struck me as, happiness is the perpetual possession of being well deceived. And that's so awful, but also there's a great truth to it. But that's what the book is about. Can you only be happy in life if you shut your eyes to Nagasaki or Hiroshima? Which by any normal definition would be seen as war crimes. It's more relevant than ever. Because the politicians that get elected now are the ones that give you the enemies you want and the heroes you want, and it's got nothing to do with reality. The basis of all populism is these people are the enemy, and there's no such thing as climate change, or on the right and the left, because Swift takes no prisoners on either side as well, and that's something that really struck me.
We can't end this episode without having a reading from Gulliver's Travels to maybe illustrate what you're describing there.
Sure.
What should we start with?
Okay, so there's a passage that I think is sort of like gets to the heart of the savage indignation here. I mean, there's so many brilliant passages to choose from, but this is in Brobdingnag, which is the kingdom where he is tiny and the king is 100 foot high, the king has been questioning him about the affairs of state in Gulliver's home country. And Gulliver goes on to write, he was perfectly astonished with the historical accounts I gave him of our affairs during the last century, protesting it was only a heap of conspiracies, rebellions, murders, massacres, revolutions, banishments, the very worst effects that avarice, faction, hypocrisy, perfidiousness, cruelty, rage, madness, hatred, envy, lust, malice and ambition could produce. His Majesty, in another audience, was at the pains to recapitulate the sum of all I had spoken, compared the questions he made with the answers I had given. Then, taking me into his hands and stroking me gently, delivered himself in these words, which I shall never forget, nor the manner in which he spoke them. My little friend Grildrig, that's what the king calls him, you have made a most admirable panegyric upon your country. You have clearly proved that ignorance, idleness, and vice are the proper ingredients for qualifying a legislator, that laws are best explained, interpreted, and applied by those whose interest and abilities lie in perverting, confounding, and eluding them. I observe among you some lines of an institution which in its original might have been tolerable, but these half erased, and the rest wholly blurred and blotted by corruptions. It does not appear from all you have said how any one perfection is acquired towards the procurement of any one station amongst you, much less that men are ennobled on account of their virtue, that priests are advanced for their piety or learning, soldiers for their conduct or valour, judges for their integrity, senators for the love of their country, or counsellors for their wisdom. As for yourself, continued the king, who has spent the greatest part of your life in travelling, I am well disposed to hope that you may hitherto have escaped many vices of your country, but by what I have gathered from your own relation and the answers I have with much pains wringed and extorted from you, I cannot but conclude the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. It's like,
so well meted out.
Yeah, and and again, it's like it's not that's not Swift's view. It's the dialectic between Gulliver and the king that you're just but it does make you sit back and go, oh god, is that right? And it's but also the language is so fantastic, but also because he read every bit of Gulliver's Travels out loud to two of his servants.
That's right, because he wanted it to be as understandable to every common reader out there.
Like Orwell, he had this thing of just speak when you mean. Language is most powerful when it's plain,
and that's why that's again it goes back to his desire to vex mankind. He really meant everybody. What I'm doing is I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody who again has heard of Gulliver's Travels, has never touched it, has never wanted to open it, has never thought to yet, and is maybe a little intimidated by the language. What would you say to somebody who senses that when they hear you reading out that passage?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to read. I mean, that's why it's been a kid's book for 300 years as well. It's like it's really simple, and so that's the main recommendation. But if you go back to where we started this conversation about factual and non-fiction and fiction, it's interesting because, of course, this is presented as a work of non-fiction. And actually what it is, as you saw from what I just read, it's an accumulation of facts. I mean, facts in inverted commas. Mm-hmm. So actually, to the male brain,
right?
Maybe that's what first appeals.
Yes, yeah. The male reader that is used to wanting to pick up information along the way will get a lot out of reading this. The texture of the prose will give them that satisfaction. That's interesting.
It's very male, and there is a lot of misogyny in there, which again I qualify by that's Gulliver's mythology more than it's Swift's.
Mm.
Although clearly he had a complicated relationship with women.
Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, you know, if you want to read about now, but in the way that is the most scabrous and brilliant and delightful and vicious, fantastic, you know, this is Donald Trump land. You know, it is like, you know, like, oh my God, how can human beings be so fucking stupid?
Yeah.
It's that. And I use that word advisedly because that's the anger that Swift uses. You know, that savage indignation, you know, coupled with, I mean, it's just really funny, even now. You know, even when I was on my way here and getting really angry with the bus going on a mad diversion in the sunshine, you know, I was just laughing out loud at what I was reading. Just going, this is brilliant.
What is it that fiction does that non-fiction simply can't? I suppose that is in some way the most overarching theme of both this conversation and conversations to come on the Lit Path. There has to be, I think, a better understanding, particularly among men, of what it is that they are missing out on and what it is that no work of non-fiction will ever be able to give them that fiction gives in abundance.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were first talking about, which is it allows you to feel, you know, and it allows you to put yourself in someone else's shoes and see the world from someone else's point of view. So yeah, it is extraordinary. I mean, there are drawbacks to that as well, but fundamentally, you know, that it's a good thing. You know, it humanizes you. But so there's all those things. Plus, of course, the exercise of reading in itself is just about the greatest thing you can do for your brain.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
You know, instead of listening to podcasts like this, Jack.
Well, quite. I mean, listen, this is meant to be
But
the
it's
gateway
also
drug.
Well, it's striking, isn't it? That, you know, like non-factual sales are slipping and non-fiction podcasts are rising.
We must do what we can
Yeah.
to kind of reorientate people who are watching this to pick up the books that we're talking about and actually read them and engage with them. Just on the subject of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, yes, it's often said that fiction allows you to empathize, and this is why sometimes it is easily either dismissed or tidily categorized as a feminine preoccupation. It's more than just being able to put yourself in others' shoes. It's also about suspending your disbelief in general. Gulliver's Travels is a great exercise in suspending your disbelief. As you say, you find yourself at times when you're reading it, reeling back and realizing what you have just allowed yourself to be told and to believe.
Yeah.
You're a master of suspension of disbelief. I mean, you make this happen for people all of the time. You've done it for decades now.
Storytelling evolved as a means for us to understand what it feels like to be something else. You know, you're passing not just a message on, but you're passing the sense you can experience what the other person is feeling at that time. It's a basic tribal mechanism, you know, and that's fundamental to what it means to be human, you know. But it's also great fun.
Would you say that if Gulliver's Travels represents one, you know, big benefit to your average doom scroller, somebody who is intensely engaged with politics, actually very interested, but through the means by which politics is translated to us today, also frequently enraged, hopeless, confused, does this book allow somebody like that to engage with politics in a healthier way, a way to feel those feelings, but also have fun feeling them finally?
Yeah, well, I think that's useful in itself. You know, I mean, I think what's striking is 300 years later, you know, nothing is better, you know, in the basic things he describes.
Which is sort of a comfort in itself, isn't it?
In some ways.
A weird,
yeah,
slightly negatively
in some ways,
skewed
it's
comfort.
and depressing as well. But it's really useful to, you know, I mean, one of the most famous passages in the book is in Lilliput, yeah, their war with Blefuscu, and then the war about which end of an egg you should crack open.
That's right.
You know, the big Indians and the little Indians, which is really a satire of Protestants and Catholics at the time.
Yeah.
But it's such a brilliant way of how derangedly absurd so many things that people are so passionate about are. You know, and again, sometimes I think, you know, when you're trapped in that kind of narcissism of petty differences, you know, you remember Swift and you go, oh, for God's sake, it doesn't matter. You know, eat the egg any end you like.
It's important to note that the audiobook of Gulliver's Travels, of which there are many versions, are very much worth getting into if reading the book seems a little intimidating, because, of course, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
a book that is designed in some ways to be read aloud, was read aloud by Swift himself, and tells the story in the way that perhaps it was meant to be told, with the intonation, depending on who's narrating it. I mean, after all, it is a satire, and the delivery of it is everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I'm told, I haven't heard it, but the version done by Niles from Frasier,
Yes.
is supposed to be exceptionally good, which I imagine is the perfect voice for it.
John, thank you very much for being my first guest on The Lit Path. I really appreciate it. There are a few people as qualified to begin this series with me. Your latest book, Trip to the Moon, came out earlier this year, and will be in paperback, I think, probably in January 2027. And that is a book that I recommend to anybody who, even if they are not yet convinced enough to pick up a work of fiction, if that's something that doesn't appeal to them instinctively, would be a great book to kind of delve into why fiction does work on you, even when you think it won't, particularly. Yes.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say, Gulliver's Travels, what a great book with which to begin.
Oh yeah, and listen,
journey.
thank you, because I hadn't read it for a long time, and I was slightly dreading it, going, oh, it'll be childish, and actually it's not. It's better now than it was.
I'm going to leave it there. John, thank you for being my first guest. This has been the first episode of The Lit Path. We look forward to welcoming you on the second very soon.